Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard Al, and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 160 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. Listen to every hour-long episode on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Each story is a powerful testimonial of the recovery available to all in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Dale C., originally released in April 2022. Dale has been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous since December 2008. My guest on today's show is my good friend Dale C. 13 years ago, Dale started attending one of my home groups, a men's meeting that I've been going to for over 33 years. Since he first stepped into that meeting, his service to the group and individual men has solidified his spot in the middle of our herd. In fact, he says it was when he started making and serving coffee in the meeting that his life began getting better. Strong testimony from a man whose drinking was fueled by the adolescent trauma he suffered when he found his father's body immediately after he had committed suicide. Though he knew what he had seen, an ironclad family secret grew out of that tragic event, and he spent many years drinking to dull the pain. Like many of us, Dale managed to function with his escalating disease, finishing college and law school before launching a successful law practice. And though he might have noticed his own heavy drinking over the years, it was his wife's alcoholism that created the most strife in their family. But things got bad enough that she stopped drinking via AA 22 years before he did. Ironically, Dale accompanied his sober wife to many AA-related functions over the years, and even got to know her AA friends and sponsor quite well. But despite his own worsening alcoholism, the attraction to AA didn't occur until late in his 50s, when the alcohol damage to his heart resulted in triple bypass surgery. While he didn't stop drinking immediately after the surgery, his looming bottom was clearly in sight. So, with his wife's help, Dale finally found AA and has been sober since then. Dale's story is remarkable in many ways, not the least of which is the impact that service work can have on the continued durability of one's sobriety. His solid practice of sponsoring other men while cultivating close personal relationships in AA has served Dale well. His daily prayer, readings, and meetings have both strengthened and enriched his program, while providing a fine example of what it takes to stay in the protective middle of AA. I think you'll enjoy my interview with Dale and find it both informative and touching. So, lend us your ears for the next hour and 5 minutes while you enjoy this episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my fine friend and AA brother, Dale C.
My name's Dale. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Dale. Thanks for being on AA Recovery Interviews podcast. I really appreciate it. This is kind of a remote podcast in a way, because you and I are sitting here during the afternoon break of an AA men's retreat here at a retreat center in Houston. And we've had the opportunity to participate in meetings together while we've been here, but I knew I wanted to do an interview with you. This gives us the opportunity to do that and spend some time together, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know there are other things you could be doing.
Well, thanks for asking me.
Yeah. So what's special about this particular interview is that you are one of only a handful of interviews I've done where I interviewed one person of the marriage and then the other person, the spouse, at some point. And I interviewed your wife, Sue, and hers was a really great interview. But it's always interesting for me to hear both sides. You've been around AA since, what is your sobriety date?
It's December 7th, 2008.
December 7th, a day which will live in infamy.
Everything exploded.
Have you really been in 14 years? No, 13?
13 and a half, yeah.
God, I remember when you came in. I remember when I heard your last name, and I said, is that her husband? Because I'd gone to meetings with Sue.
Yeah, she got sober in 1986.
Right.
And what a wonderful thing that was for our family. I mean, it was amazing how good everything got.
Yeah, she told me, that her story about her journey to get into AA was one that I could see that your family was at a real crossroads there towards the end of her drinking.
Yeah, I didn't know whether to divorce her or kill her. You know? If I'd have killed her, I'd be out of prison by now. But
That's terrible.
yeah, it is terrible. But
You might decide you want that cut out later.
that's right. She's, she has such a wonderful program, and she sponsors so many women, and has from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And had a wonderful sponsor herself.
That was Martha, wasn't it?
Martha W.
Martha was. Is she still living, Martha?
No, Martha has passed, and it was what a great gift when she passed. She was in a assisted living place. Her roommate sent down a box of mementos from Martha that Martha wanted Sue to have.
Oh, wow.
And lots of old pictures, and Martha's first year Zippo lighter that they used to give away.
Yeah, they used to give lighters on the first anniversary, didn't they?
Right.
But that's back during smoking meetings.
Yeah.
Martha was a very no-nonsense type of member of AA. She was really big on the traditions, too, wasn't she?
She was. She always had the traditions dinner.
Yeah.
That where they went through all the 12 traditions. And Martha was real big on that, real big on service. Mm-hmm. Did a lot of conferences, and Martha was a circuit speaker and went around talking about recovery. And
so it's safe to say that you had a lot of exposure to AA well before you ever got here.
Oh, yeah, I used to go to birthday meetings when Sue would pick up another chip. Uh-huh. And, I loved Martha. Martha was always so super sweet, but she was hard on Sue.
Was she?
Yeah, but she was super sweet to me. We did a lot of work around her house and helped her hang drapes and put in a dog door.
Yeah, and this is long before you got into the program yourself.
That's right.
So I can imagine how somebody was influenced by their exposure to AA to the degree that you were. Here's Sue, a very, very active member of her groups and a very active member. And I can imagine somebody might want to go into AA just so they can have something else to do with their wife or their husband. But your exposure to the program, how did that coincide with your drinking at the time?
Well, everybody's progression is different. And I had drank, moderately for many, many years. It was only, I guess, in the last, 5 to 10 years of my drinking that it accelerated. But it accelerated at a pace that was, I didn't notice it. Mm-hmm. I was denying it. I'm sure I was purposely putting it out of my mind and saying, no, I don't have this problem. Mm-hmm. We only have one alcoholic in our family, and that's Sue. When truly it was becoming a problem for me.
So the fact that Sue was the alcoholic became a good excuse for you not to be one.
Right.
Because you already had one.
Right.
During that time that you guys were married, that you were drinking to the extent that maybe you would have been the AA material when she indeed was, what kind of feedback was she giving you about your drinking at the time? Or did she stay completely away from that?
Well, you know how the alcoholic hides.
Yeah.
There were occasions when she would say, you might want to take a look at your drinking. And that would usually elicit there's nothing wrong with my drinking. I don't have a problem, and then try to change the subject.
How well did that work?
Not at all. So Sue's approach to it was to back off, and to, I guess, eventually let me find my own bottom.
Yeah.
Which we all have to do.
That's amazing. Was she also working Al-Anon at the time? Was she involved with Al-Anon at all?
A little bit.
And how about you? Were you involved in Al-Anon when she was in AA?
I was not.
So your exposure to the 12-step programs was vicarious through Sue and her involvement. So she was a member of AA for 23 years before you came in.
Yeah.
When did you start drinking? How old were you when you had your first drink?
First drink I had that I what I consider a real sit down and let's get drunk drink was when I was almost 12.
What did that scene look like?
It was ugly. You know, the very first time I got drunk, I blacked out. It was about a month after my father had committed suicide.
Oh, God.
He was an alcoholic, and he had had a very difficult time trying to get sober. He was a physician.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in those days, in the 1950s, there was a big stigma about alcoholism, and particularly among the medical community. So he would go down to the hospital to get dried out, and then he would come back, and then he would, you know, go on the wagon for a while, and then, then he would drink again. And I mean, he had horrific accidents, car accidents, and lost his driver's license. And those were in the days when pediatricians, which he was, would make house calls.
Uh-huh.
And so he would go out, and I remember one time coming home, he was drunk and ran off the road and ran down a ravine into a creek and broke his leg, broke his jaw, you know, and they brought him home that night and took him to the hospital. You know, the police didn't arrest him then, but eventually they did, and he lost his license and, you know, had difficulties, you know, couldn't drive for a year.
But he was still allowed to practice medicine.
Still allowed to practice medicine, and my mother would drive him around to house calls.
Now, do you have siblings?
I do. I had 3 brothers. One of them passed away, and a sister.
So you were exposed to your dad's alcoholism from the time you were a little kid?
Oh, yeah.
What was that like growing up in that environment?
Well, if you've ever talked to, and I haven't been involved in ACA, but if you ever talked to somebody, a child of an alcoholic, you know, when you come home, you don't know what you're going to find. You know, you don't know if it's going to be chaotic or if it's going to be peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to bring your friends home.
Mm-hmm.
You're embarrassed about, you know, the fact that your father's an alcoholic. You know he's got a problem, and you make fun of him, and you ridicule him behind his back, and you know, it's a sad deal.
And that was going on from the time you were a little kid until you actually took your first drink.
Right.
What was your dad like when he was drunk? Was he rageful? Was he violent? Was he happy? Was he giddy? I mean, what was his demeanor?
He was very morose and almost non-communicative. No, there was not much interaction at all.
God, that must have been really tough as a little kid.
Yeah.
And your mom, where was she through all of this?
You know, they dealt with this stuff, you know, out of our eyesight and earsight. And I know they talked about it a lot. And I talked with my mother about it after he passed. And, you know, she said he just had a problem that he could never solve. You know, he had depression. So they dealt with it, but not with the kids.
Right, so whatever they were doing to deal with it, the kids were just not involved.
Not involved at all.
So by the time he ended his own life, you say you were 12 years old when that happened? Mm-hmm. What was the immediate aftermath of that for you?
Oh, it was horrible. It was. We were able to stay in the same house, but everything was really, I mean, the finances were tough, you know, because my mother was a school teacher. Mm-hmm. And she went back to work, got her master's degree, became a librarian. And so through my teenage years, we were pretty much, I mean, she was doing her best to make a living and keep food on the table, and we were kind of running loose. But it was a close family. I was really close with my mother and my brothers and my sister at the time. But the way my sister reacted to it all is shortly after our father passed, she got married like at 17. So she was escaping. And then my older brother, he escaped into books. You know, he was real smart, but he was also an alcoholic. He developed into an alcoholic, as did my twin brother, who's still practicing.
He's still practicing?
Yeah, and my younger brother.
And your younger brother. So you're the only one amongst the siblings to get sober?
That's it.
So when your dad committed suicide, did you know that that's what he had done at 12? What were you being told about that at the time?
We were told it was an accident, but putting two and two together, there was no counseling about that. There was really not much discussion about it. Mm-hmm. But we knew what had happened. Mm-hmm. You know, my brother and I were the one that found him, and
oh, jeez,
he had a .22 rifle that he used to kill himself with. Yeah,
that must have been traumatic for you as a kid.
It was, and it was one of the resentments that I carried until I got sober, until I was 59. So, you know, you can get from 12 to 59, you carry this resentment. Where was his willpower? Where was his, you know, he abandoned us, you know, it was, you know, he was weak, you know, all of that stuff.
So how did all that stuff that you've reconsidered once you had gotten into the program and started working the steps, how did that play out from the time you were 12 onward in the subsequent years to your father's death?
I reacted to it by not talking about it, not telling people about it, you know, avoiding it. You know, if people would bring it up, I would say, oh, it was an accident, you know, the story that I was told, because I was embarrassed about that.
But you knew it wasn't an accident, but you had to keep the family story.
It was a secret, family secret. But when I got sober, I was able to see that I was just like him. Mm-hmm. He was 47 years old when he killed himself. And I remember when I was 47, going, well, I made it, you know, I made it past 47. But then when I got sober and I started, and this was big on my resentment list, you know, I started to see that it was possible to let that go, that this was one of those resentments that, although I didn't have a direct part in it, you know, I had a part because I had held on to that. And so I was able to forgive him. I was able to say, you know what, there but for the grace of God go I. You know, I could be you, you know, I could have killed myself.
So this is a traumatic experience that happens at 12. Can you walk us down the path a little bit from 12 onward, let's say through your junior high and high school years with regard to drinking and your behavior?
Yeah, you know, in high school, it was all beer, and every now and then it got into the hard stuff. You know, we had a friend whose parents went out of town a lot, and so we would gather up over there and drink and bring our dates over there. You know, we were the crowd that, you know, that you could go and find a drinking party. You know, you know, and we drank a lot. You know, we had older guys that were part of the group that could buy us whiskey and beer, and so we would have kegs, but it was just weekend type stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't, you know, during school. I mean, and that was before marijuana, you know, because I didn't really find marijuana until college, you know, and then it became, you know, after high school, it became a lot of different drugs.
Yeah.
It became psychedelic drugs. It became, you know, everything from LSD to mushrooms to peyote to always a lot of weed, you know, and always liquor.
So what was the crowd that you were hanging with in high school that was doing all this drinking on the weekends?
Well, they were pretty fast.
The fast crowd.
They were, you know.
Were you a leader or a follower?
I was pretty much a follower. We thought we were the cool crowd, you know. We thought that we had cool girlfriends. Because of our financial situations, we all had to work in my family. And I worked at steakhouse every day until after school, during the week until like 10 or 11 at night, and then get up and go to school. But that's how you earn money to buy liquor, you know, go on dates. So yeah, I never got in trouble in high school because of drinking, and I never really got in trouble in college because of drugs or alcohol. You know, I mean, there were times when I could have been arrested, but God must have been looking over me, you know, because I would be stopped by the police, and there would be drugs in the car, and for some reason they wouldn't find them, you know, or I would be drunk, and I would be stopped, and the cop gets another call and says, "Okay, we got to go."
Wow.
That kind of thing would happen. But I never got arrested. Never got a DWI. My brother, the one who's still drinking, it's my twin brother, he has 2 DWIs. And so he just doesn't drive anymore.
It's one way to not get a DUI is to not drive.
That's right.
So did you go away to school when you went to college?
I did for the first year, and that's where we did a lot of drugs. But then I came back to Houston and graduated from the University of Houston, 1971.
Huh.
And it was that same year that Sue and I got married.
That's right. You were college sweethearts, weren't you?
Yeah, we knew each other. We got together, in fact, got married in my last year in March. In fact, we just celebrated 51 years.
Oh, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
I consider that a huge miracle that we went through 2 sobering ups, and we're still married. I still love that woman.
That's amazing. Very few people are blessed in that way, and you're definitely one of them, which is what's so important about you being such an active member of the program, because people get to hear the message right there, and it's possible to get through 2 sobering ups and stay married over 50 years.
Yeah, it takes work.
A lot of work, I'm sure. So you went from college to law school after?
Yeah, there was a period of 10 years where we lived in Austin. And I worked in journalism for a while. And then I came back to Houston and went to law school. And I was a good boy in law school. I didn't, I was focused.
Yeah.
I wasn't drinking a lot. I wasn't smoking weed a lot. It was a real hard work time.
Now, you and Sue got married in 71. She got sober in 86. So there was a period of time in there where both of your drinking overlapped. What was that period of time like for the two of you with regard to drinking itself? Was it a big part of your life?
It was. We had tons of friends in Austin, and we did a lot of outdoor stuff, and we would have volleyball parties and with kegs, and it was lots of parties, and it was, Sue was a real party girl. I could tell you some wild stories about her, but I won't. She wouldn't appreciate it.
Well, she's probably already told them on the podcast anyway, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, I guess for the first 15 years of our marriage, we were drinking buddies.
So that must have made it difficult for you whenever it was she decided to stop, because you were losing your drinking buddy.
Yeah, I was. It was like losing a pal. It redefined our relationship. She was becoming responsible. She was cleaning up the past, and I didn't know what to make of it at first. I was happy. I was grateful, but I was a little bit threatened by it.
Were you keeping up with her? Were you guys on an even basis with regard to your drinking, or had her alcohol consumption accelerated beyond yours?
Oh, it had accelerated beyond mine. Yeah. In fact, now that I think about it, I don't think I could ever drink as much as she could until the end of my drinking. But she had a very hard time, and I can remember when I was in law school, I would get a call from her, and she said, you got to come pick me up, and I can't drive, and I'm studying for a final, and I would go pick her up, and she would be remorseful, and and she got very angry towards the end of her drinking. That was the way alcohol was affecting her. She was angry a lot. I didn't know how to deal with her.
Now, what was the family situation like at that point with regard to children?
We have one child. She is 47 now. But at the time, she was 12 or 13 when Sue got sober. I had graduated from law school in 1982. And so I started working. And so the way it was working was I was taking Amy to school, and then Sue was picking her up and bringing her home. And I was getting Amy ready to go to school, and Sue never got arrested either, which is amazing, But then she started going, when she got sober in 1986, she started going to the Houston Western Club, which is no longer.
Yeah.
But, which was just within walking distance of our house. And so she would walk up there, and she got hooked up with some some good women. Eventually got hooked up with Martha, who sponsored her until Martha's death a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
How did the rigors of first law school and then being a newly practicing attorney, how did that play into your availability to Sue and your daughter?
Well, it took me away. I mean, I was working 12, 15 hours a day. You know, I was, working hard, trying to get everything done in one day, trying to keep up. Yeah, it was a busy time. You know, it's a stressful job. You know, it takes up a lot of your attention. You know, I did get pulled away from the family.
Yeah. That must be tough in retrospect to think about the time that you weren't there.
It is.
Was that the kind of thing that ends up on a men's list down the road?
It does, and of course, when I made amends to our daughter, this is the way that went down. It was, you know how God makes situations available to you so you can make those amends?
Yeah.
Well, about a year after I got sober, and I was still working on all my amends, my brother died. My older brother.
The older brother.
Pancreatic cancer, and he was living in Bastrop.
Mm-hmm.
And so before he died, I was spending a lot of time with him. I went up there and helped him settle his affairs and get all of his papers in order, and made amends to him.
Mm.
But I remember on one trip, Amy and I rode up together. It was the perfect time, and I just realized that, now's the time I'm supposed to make amends. And so we talked about all the times I wasn't available. We talked about the embarrassing times for her, that she would be embarrassed to bring her friends around. Because by this time, she was out of college herself.
Right. Sue got sober when she was 12, so she would have remembered the two of you drinking as she was a little kid, growing up to age 12.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What was predominant in her mind with regard to who was the alcoholic in the family? Did you get a sense of that?
Definitely her mother, because by the time I got sober, she was out of the house. She had just gotten married.
Uh-huh.
She was starting her own family. So, but it was good. One of the best amends that I felt good about with my daughter was to acknowledge, what a great person she is.
Yeah.
Because I realized after I got sober that I was not one of these guys that would dole out, congratulations, accomplishments. She was a great student. She went all the way through college and became a veterinarian and has 2 great kids. And, I never patted her on the back enough, and so that was a kind of an amends that I was able to say, I really love you, and I need you to know how great I think you are, how accomplished I think you are, and how much I love you, and I don't say it enough,
How did she react to that?
Oh, she said, "Oh, Dad," it was, but she accepted it, with grace.
Did you notice a shift in your relationship after that?
I did.
In what way?
After I got sober, her children were infants then, one was an infant, one was a little bit older. I got to start, keeping them while she was out, by myself. I got to pick them up from school. I got to, start taking them to sports practice. I got to be involved. I would get called and say, "Dad, I got a flat tire. Can you come help me?"
Mm-hmm.
I got her calling me asking for advice, about maybe a legal problem she had, or, and I realized I had been so quick to offer an opinion, unasked. But when I stopped, doing that, then people started asking me so what do you think about this?
Huh.
It was weird. It was, rather than pushing, I was just waiting.
How did all that affect the relationships with your grandchildren?
The youngest was only 1 year old when I got sober, and the older one was 4. So, they've never said anything about it. I think And I've never really talked to them about my participation in Alcoholics Anonymous.
They're still kids, though, right?
Yeah, they're still kids.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one's 18 now, and one is 14. But they know we don't drink.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't think that's weird. Yeah, I guess I heard one, you probably know Zach, you know, he said, yeah, a lot of the children of sober alcoholics think that alcoholics are people that don't drink. You know? And so if they know that much about it,
Yeah.
of course my daughter is well aware, my son-in-law is well aware, and I think they have a healthy attitude about recovery.
So, just rewinding a little bit, the years that overlap between you and Sue drinking, you were drinking buddies. Somewhere along the way, she makes the decision that she has to stop drinking. Knowing that she was making this decision, or seeing her go forth into AA, seeing her get help, seeing her get hooked up with Martha and everything else, as your drinking buddy, I would imagine you knew you would lose her as a drinking buddy if she did this. Did you in any way try to talk her out of it?
No. I was so happy that she was sober because alcohol was not good for her, and it wasn't good for me, you know. So after getting over my sort of discomfort with this change, you know, I adjusted to it, and I really respected her sobriety.
How did it affect your drinking once she got sober? Did you stay at the same level? Did you accelerate, decelerate?
It stayed pretty much at the same level all through my 40s. And I mean, I was working really hard, and I started to make a lot of money. And I don't know when exactly it started accelerating, but like I said earlier, as I got into my 50s, I noticed that it started getting worse. I was using it to deal with stress. You know, I was using it to relax. You know, I call it winding it down, you know. But then I started having health problems. In my mid-50s, I started having heart problems.
Like palpitations or arrhythmia?
Yeah, I started having that, and so I consulted a cardiologist, and eventually I ended up having open heart surgery, which I later learned, you know, was partly related to my drinking.
In what ways?
Well, alcohol's action on the heart is not a good one. It's not good for the arteries, you know. Excessive drinking and the hangovers that come with it are a stress on the heart. Mm-hmm. And you combine that with blockage, you know, and it's just a recipe for disaster.
Did you actually have a heart attack?
I didn't have a heart attack. I was having severe chest pains, and I went in for a stent, and my cardiologist discovered that I needed surgery that day, right then. So I had the surgery, triple bypass. And when I got sober a couple of years later, you know, we talked about it. My cardiologist and I, he said, yeah, that drinking, you never told me the truth. You always said you only drank 2 drinks a day, you know, like we all do. So that was a long recovery from heart surgery, and drinking with that, I kept on drinking.
Even during your convalescence?
Especially during my convalescence, because with heart surgery, what they don't tell you is that there is a depression that comes with it afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so I started drinking more heavily to deal with that. And then the year after I had my heart surgery, I had prostate cancer surgery. So now I've got 2 things to pity myself about. And so I dealt with that by drinking more.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. What'd you do about the physical pain from the heart surgery and the prostate? Was it all alcohol relief for the pain, or did you mix in any kind of narcotics or drugs?
My cardiologist wasn't big on pain medications, so it was just alcohol. The pills were never my deal, you know.
Fortunately. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had the open heart surgery, and then you had prostate surgery the next year. Mm-hmm. And this was how long before you came in?
2 years. That 2 years was hell.
So were you able to work during that time, or what was going on with that?
Yeah, I was able to work, but I was really not doing very well. And I, consciously started taking fewer clients. That was when the everyday drinking started. The drinking in the morning started about a year before I came in.
What was behind the drinking in the morning and the regular or constant drinking? What was the feeling or thoughts behind that?
Well, I was shaking in the morning. I had to drink in order for my hands to calm down, so I could use the keyboard, or use the telephone. It was to calm my nerves. When I read Dr. Bob's Nightmare in the big book, I could relate to what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. I had to drink, to calm my nerves, and then I found that the alcohol allowed me to function. It became like normal for me to be drinking. And there were mornings when I would get up and start going to the office and just turn around and come back. I just couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. And so I saw a psychologist about that time. Mm-hmm. I just felt lost. And the way I described it then is just, I just lost my way. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing, But I still hadn't admitted that the alcohol was the problem. I thought it was just a depression.
So Sue was taking care of you during this time, I assume.
She was.
What was she saying to you at that time, knowing what she knew about the probable causes for your heart problems and knowing that you were drinking much more and on a daily basis?
I think she focused more on the recovery from the 2 surgeries than on the alcohol consumption. Because I think at the same time that I was drinking more, I was hiding it more. I would have a glass of vodka and I would pretend like it was water.
Was she fooled by that, by the way?
I don't think so. But in any event, she wasn't saying anything about it because of my physical condition. There was a lot of rehab that I had to go through to get back strength. Of course, I milked that. Mm-hmm. So it just accelerated from there, man. It was like, a jetliner falling out of the sky. It was just, straight down.
So you went to the psychologist. What did the psychologist say to you?
Well, I did own up to that it was an alcohol problem. There was a glimmer of thought in my mind that this might be related to alcohol. But at the same time, my cardiologist had referred me to a neurologist because I was having dizziness, which was really related to the alcohol. I was having, balance problems related to the alcohol.
Yeah, of course.
I was, but all of this was just my version of complete denial about what my condition was, what it was related to. So after the neurologist ran all this battery of tests, and result was that it's alcohol abuse. And I went, don't put that in my chart, I was upset about it.
So you received the alcoholic diagnosis?
Yeah. Related to alcohol abuse, and still, when I came back to my cardiologist, he just said, well, it looks like you're going to have to cut back, and he wasn't really up to date on alcoholism, but he said, you cannot drink more than 2 drinks a day. I said, okay. So it was shortly after that I came in.
What were the final days like?
My last binge started on Thanksgiving in 2008. I don't remember much between Thanksgiving and December 7th. It was about 10 days or 2 weeks. I don't know. I'd have to look back at the calendar. All I remember is just, finally coming to this awareness that I had this problem, not knowing what to do about it, knowing that Alcoholics Anonymous works for people because I'd seen it work in Sue, not wanting to give up the alcohol. And so just drinking more and more to blot that out. So it all came to a head that Sunday, December 7th, when it was just like, it was such a gift. That moment of clarity we get. I was sitting on my back porch. I had a cup of coffee and a glass of vodka. I suddenly snapped to, I can't live like this. This is wrong. This is not normal.
So that hit you for the first time?
That way. That was my bottom. That was my moment of clarity. That was my gift from God. His message to me, Dale, stop this.
So you had gotten an empirical message from a neurologist who says you really need to stop. And then you get permission from the cardiologist to cut back. And then you have this spiritual kick in the pants sitting on your back porch. How is it that the empirical, you're a smart guy. How is it that the empirical advice you were given didn't do it? Why did you have to wait for the spiritual?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's because the empirical you can deny. The spiritual you cannot. The truth of that spiritual moment where it's just made completely plain to you, that you've been given every bit of information and, God says, stop. I'll help you. Sue had given me the name of 3 men to talk to in this period of time before Thanksgiving and around that time. You need to take a look at your drinking. I don't want to watch you die. We want to do something about it. Call one of these men. And one of them turned out to be my sponsor, Larry B.
Yeah.
One of them was John, and one of them was Jack.
3 heavyweights.
Yeah, and so I called all 3 of them, and Jack was the only one that answered the phone. Jack said, meet me up at Holy Name. It's 6 o'clock tonight. And so we came to that meeting. And I remember Bob G. was leading that meeting, and I think you were there. I think John N. was chairing that meeting. I still remember it so vividly. Don't remember a lot, but
I do remember it. And I remember when I found out your last name and I put 2 and 2 together, because I knew she'd gotten sober a long time ago, and then here you were. And I guess somewhere along the way I must have assumed about her spouse. And I'm sure I met you prior to then, but I don't have a whole lot of recall about it. But I guess I just assumed that because she was sober, she would probably have a sober husband, which is why I was surprised whenever it was I learned that you were her husband. What were the first meetings like for you? You'd had this God moment, this awareness, this spiritual realization. What were the early meetings and what was your early AA like?
Well, I'll tell you that one significant thing happened to me the very next day after that first meeting. I had met Jack D, and Jack D said, well, you got to come tomorrow night. So here I am the following Monday, and I'm feeling really ragged. Feeling very electric.
Were you detoxing?
I was detoxing. I got in the car that night to go to that 8 o'clock meeting, and on the way to that meeting, I had an accident. I had a seizure, a withdrawal seizure. And all I remember is that I kind of got lost, I got disoriented, and next thing I know, I'm being shoved into the back of an ambulance. And I had run into a guy in a Land Rover. My car had run up against a telephone post, and the guy that I ran into had found a piece of pipe and broke the window so he could turn the car off. I learned this later by talking to him. Of course, my insurance paid for everything, but I just remember, after the release from that seizure, and being shoved into the back of that ambulance, I had this wonderful feeling that everything was going to be okay. And it convinced me beyond all doubt that my alcohol problem was so serious that I could never drink again. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't had that seizure. I wonder if I'd have tried to blow it off and say, oh, my drinking wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
I'm not capable of drinking like that to where I would become so addicted that I would have a seizure when I quit drinking.
Is that what they realized at that point? I mean, the seizure was the cause of the accident?
Yes.
Because you must have still been in a condition that would suggest that, I guess.
Yeah, and I remember about a week later, my insurance company called me to take a statement from me.
Uh-huh.
Insurance adjuster's kind of hard-nosed, and I was straight up, you know. I called Larry, and I'd already got a sponsor. I called him. I said, I don't know what to tell him. And Larry said, well, just tell him the truth, you know. So I told the adjuster, I'm an alcoholic, and I had a seizure related to a withdrawal from alcohol.
Mm.
There was a silence on the phone, and then the insurance adjuster said, well, I'm going to turn the recorder off. He said, I'm in Al-Anon, and I'm happy for you that you're getting sober, and I wish you well, and we're going to pay this claim.
Wow. Another God thing.
I know, you know.
What are the odds of that?
No, yeah. I thought they were going to deny the claim. It was going to cost me a bunch of money. Just a drunk that ran into somebody. And
Did you get cited?
no.
So it was an accident that they could have gone either way, but turns out the guy was an Al-Anon.
Yeah, he said, I'm going to rule that this is an act of God, and so we're going to go ahead and pay this. And it was an act of God.
It was an act of God. God, that's an amazing story. So all this is happening when you're within your first week of sobriety?
Week of sobriety. And the only time I felt safe in that first 30 days was when I was in a meeting or when I was reading the big book or when I was talking to Larry.
What was the rest of your detoxing like?
Well, my doctor put me on a short term of Librium to kind of smooth me out, you know. And so that lasted, you know, a week or so. And, you know, by then, you know, the detoxing was pretty well over.
So the fog started to lift.
Fog started to lift, and I remember Sue was on the phone to Martha, and they were saying, well, maybe we should taper him off, maybe get some beer, and I refused it. I said, no, I don't want any.
Good thing.
I don't want to taper off. You know, I want to just be stopped.
Wow.
And so I remember talking to Martha, talking to Sue a lot. She was so encouraging, you know, and she would go with me to meetings, but eventually she said, you're going to have to find your own meetings, you know, and, you know, you need to find your crowd. I was voraciously reading all the AA literature, and I read the book that Bill read when he was in the hospital, you know, William James, The Variety of Religious Experience. And he devotes 3 chapters to the conversion experience. So I started getting interested in, well, how does this happen? And, you know, how do people connect with God? And so that's kind of started the spiritual part of my journey, you know. But, yeah, I was going to meetings every day. You know, I think for the first almost 10 years, I was going to a meeting every day. I still go to like 5 meetings a week.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the thing I remember about you in the early days was that I don't think you were doing the coffee yet. I think Jim D and 1 or 2 other people were doing the coffee. But you've been doing the coffee in that Sunday night meeting now for well over 10 years, right?
Oh, yeah, I think 12 years, I think I've been doing it.
You know, I've interviewed other people, and certainly have known lots of people over the years, that service commitment was really instrumental in their long-term recovery.
No doubt. I mean, when I started doing the coffee, my life started getting better, you know. It started being, this is great to do something for somebody else. You know, this is wonderful. You know, and about that same time, I started sponsoring guys.
So you had already worked the steps by that point.
Yes.
How long did it take you to get through the steps?
I got through all the steps, and probably in the first 6 months.
Wow.
And I think, well, I was 59 when I came in, and I was anxious to get going. You know, I felt like Well, if I was 20, maybe I would take 5 years to do this.
Yeah,
but
right.
I'm 59, so. But I really got interested in being sober. I got happy about being sober. I found joy in the meetings. I felt safe in the meetings. I felt like I was learning more about me.
Yeah, I could definitely sense the change in humility in the first number of years, especially when you started doing the coffee. I was wondering, you mentioned about sponsees, looking at their sobriety and the work that they're doing sponsoring other people. What part of your sobriety do you see most reflected in them?
Well, it has to be the commitment to service. It has to be the joy and the acceleration in your program that you get from working with others. I mean, your program really comes alive when you start passing it on. I learned, it takes on a life of its own, and you see it being perpetuated and carried on down the line, another link in the chain.
Is that why I see so many of your guys serving coffee over the years?
Yeah,
Seriously.
I'm in a management position now.
It's always so great to see those guys doing it. They're just stepping right up to it. So I've had a couple of other people, and we won't name them by name, but I've had a few of your sponsees actually on the podcast.
Yes, I had a resentment about that.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm doing this now, okay, because we're coming. I knew I was going to interview you, but all in good time. But I wondered, because I'm thinking about a couple of the guys who I know who you sponsor now, and you and I both know who they are, who had been sponsored and then went out and slipped and came back. And it turns out that their sobriety didn't really start sticking until you started sponsoring them. What do you think you were doing or saying to them that was making a big difference in them finally being able to get sober?
I think that they were just ready. I don't look at it as anything more than explaining the program as I understand it, telling my experience with the program, what I've learned, and God's really doing the work. I just get to kind of see it happen, and there is an energy, I think, between two people. If you connect with the guy that you're taking through the steps and you're really communicating with him and you're really explaining the principles and the different parts of the steps, explaining, well, this is the third step. We're talking about control, acceptance. You kind of have a lesson plan. I took it seriously when I started sponsoring guys, and it was important to me to learn enough about the program so I could pass it on. I mean, the real program, not me, but what the program says about staying sober.
Yeah, that's the legacy part of the program.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you engage in a lot of extracurricular activities with some of the guys that you sponsor. I know you're an avid golfer. To what extent did that solidify or enhance your relationship with the guys that you sponsor? And to what degree do you think that had an influence on their enthusiasm for AA and their willingness to be of more service?
Well, it's good to get to know your guys really well and to show them that there's life after alcohol, and that you can play around the golf and not drink a fifth of Jack Daniels. And, what I found with my own sponsor is that if I'm in touch with him a lot, I may not need to talk with him every day about something that's bothering me, but that familiarity makes it easier for me to say, oh, Larry, by the way, I need to talk to you about something, something that's bothering me. And I think if you don't talk to your sponsor a lot, then it makes it more difficult to pick up that phone and say, I'm really scared about this, or I'm really angry about this. So I don't know. There's a lot of camaraderie with some of the guys I sponsor, and some of the guys don't call that much.
Yeah.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, I know it's that way for me too. I sponsored a lot of guys over the years, some of whom have become closer personal friends, and some still are in that sponsor-sponsee type relationship, and that's
Yeah.
fine. There's a mixture of all kinds. One of the things I find most gratifying about watching you stay sober is seeing what effect it's had on Larry over the years. I've noticed since I first met Larry, right when he first came in, that sponsoring you, I think, took his participation in AA and his program to the next level. So there's something really special and of high quality to the way you guys relate to each other that I think has made a big, big difference in his life. I think sometimes we overlook the fact that we are definitely having an influence on someone else who is actually helping us, but it helps them as they help us. And Larry is, he's a really good man, good-hearted soul.
Best.
So early on, you get these sponsees, you're going to a lot of meetings. What sort of things have happened during your sobriety over the past 13 years that were milestones or were momentous occasions or calamitous situations where your being sober and a member of AA made a big difference?
Well, I think when my brother died, that was a big thing to get through.
How long were you sober at that time?
A year. And I count that as just about the only time that I was in a panic enough to where I might have picked up a drink. I was scared, I didn't know what to do. He didn't get the diagnosis until 3 weeks before he died.
And it was pancreatic cancer?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty swift-moving...
Died 17 days later.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. But the odd thing that happened then was that I had signed up to be a contact person for the Lawyer's Assistant Program with State of Texas, State Bar. And that day that I was in such a panic, I get a call from a guy that's been referred by TLAP. And he's an alcoholic and, he needs some help. That's another God thing.
What was your initial reaction to that? Did you see the gift in that call immediately?
Immediately. The more evidence I get of God acting in my life, the more convinced I am that, there's a plan out there that's got me in mind and that God's, wants to do good for me.
Wow, so that pulled you through that situation. It got you out of your own head, right?
It got me out of it immediately.
So you could be of service to others. I know that Sue has faced some challenges over the last number of years, and can you talk to that a little bit?
Sue got sick with breast cancer a couple of years ago, and that was a tough time for both of us. Lots of fear, lots of, and plus on top of that, we got the pandemic that's going on.
Right.
So we were isolated, and yet she was still having to go, and she was very weak and very sick, with the chemo, and I had doubts about whether I was going to be able to give the kind of service that she needed. Did I have it in me to be helpful?
That must have been a really scary prospect to not know that.
Yeah, this was a test. That's the way I saw it.
Yeah.
I said, am I man enough and big enough and sober enough and selfless enough, to be of help? And so I started learning how to cook, and I started learning how to, my work has been slowly, as you know, I've been trying to retire. And so, I was able to take her to the hospital, and then they said, okay, you can't come into the hospital anymore. So while she was in there, I would have to wait out, and I would find places to wait. And thought I would, this is going to make me impatient, and I'm going to be a baby about this. But I wasn't. I surprised myself. But it's because of this program.
You were still going to meetings all the time?
All the time. Of course, at that time, there was a lot of Zoom meetings.
What have you noticed about the times when you've had those challenges? What have you noticed about the way AA kind of gathers around the man who needs support? What was that like for you?
I was just amazed about, how all the men in my life, were supportive. They would call, they would bring food by. Sue's friends and her program were right there with her. This fellowship is amazing.
Sometimes we're not the best judges of the quality of our own programs, but seeing how other people around us, sponsees, friends, members of meetings, react at times when we need it the most. I've had that occur through some other very, very difficult times. The people were there because I was there. And, if you want people to care about you, obviously you got to be around for them to care about. It doesn't surprise me at all that the men gathered around you, the women gathered around Sue, and you both pulled through it. In fact, I interviewed her when she was on the better end of her convalescence, and it was a real blessing to be able to do that.
Right.
So you got through that situation. Have there been any other things that have occurred, let's say some really good things that happened, or other things within that period of sobriety?
Well, it's funny. When Sue was sick, I had a friend. Well, I have a friend within the program whose wife was going through the same thing, and he told me that there are going to be many angels that come out of this that you are not aware of right now. And which turned out to be true. The men that I talked about, the women, but not only that, some of the women at the hospital. When we were allowed, both of us, to go in, I was able to see this wonderful woman she was in treatment also, but she was further along, and she was just on follow-up, and she came and sat with Sue and comforted her, and it was just like, it made all the difference in the world. You see the good in people coming out, the caring about other people coming out, the humanity coming out. The love coming out.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. It's the love and the awareness that a power greater than ourselves is applying that love for us unconditionally and without haste. Do you ever reflect on the years that you could have been sober that you weren't?
Yeah. I wish I'd have gotten sober earlier and discovered this way of life. But, I'm just grateful for the life I got now.
Yeah. I was just curious, what is there that you might have heard at that time that might have changed your trajectory? Knowing what you know now about the program and about all the gifts, so this is Dale being able to go back and talk to Dale from yesteryear.
What would I tell him?
Yeah.
I would tell him, you don't commit forever. Just take a look at this, The Dale of 50 years old, I could say, you might feel better. You don't have to do it forever. Just do it for today. See what you think. Let me talk to you about it. And I wonder if I would be open-minded enough to say, all right, I'll give it a shot, or whether I would, treat him like a Bible salesman and slam the door.
Well, it sounds like the difference between talking to somebody about AA as being a one-day-at-a-time thing as opposed to you come into AA and you never drink again. That's too big.
That is too big.
Who can get their head around that? But just like what you just said, when you would have talked to that Dale and said, why don't you give it a try? You don't have to do it forever. Those are the kind of messages that if they're hearing that instead of you've got to stop drinking for good, that might get through, huh?
Yeah, that's what might get through. I didn't know you could do it one day at a time. I thought it had to be you quit and you never go back and you're miserable for the rest of your life. That's the way I thought about it. When you're not in AA and you're not sober, and the thought of getting sober and it being a permanent thing, is, like you say, it's more than you can put your head around.
Right, that idea of I will never have fun in my life ever again is a lot more difficult to handle than if I try it tomorrow and it really sucks, I can always go back to drinking.
Yeah, you can always do it.
Although we don't tend to go after people like that, but even in the big book, there's lots of room for that. I've known people who felt like they justified their slipping to what it said in the big book. The big book gave me permission to do this because it says in there, if you're doubtful, try some controlled drinking. Well, there's the permission to go back out and, or not come in to begin with.
Yeah.
But the fact that you were able to realize that now, and even though you can't go back to those years, that same message is never wasted on the next guy who walks through the door. Huh?
Yeah, how do you convince a guy that doesn't think he's got a problem, has a problem? It's impossible. That's why we have to We have to feel the pain before we can stop.
Well, it astounds me at how fast the last 13 years have gone by. It seems like a blink of the eye.
Me too.
And I feel so blessed to have been part of the journey with you, and also with Sue in the earlier years that I saw her all the time, but now knowing the gifts that you're able to bring to this program by your very presence in the meetings. And I see how men love you and treat you with a lot of respect, and they honor your participation in the program. I certainly do. I love you, and you're one of my favorite people.
I love you too, Alan.
I can't tell you how glad I am that you were able to do this today. It's a wonderful thing. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to just kind of put out there to the universe of Alcoholics Anonymous?
If it's nothing else, it's that I'm grateful for this way of life. It's not something I ever expected. Mm-hmm. It's a big surprise to me, that life is so good. After being in that spot where you think that this is horrible, life is horrible, and then you die, It's like I never imagined that I could have the kind of joy and happiness and peace and contentment that I have, and that my relationship with Sue is still strong.
That's amazing.
It is. I'm not bored with life anymore. Serious, end-of-the-road drinking, that's what life is. It's boring.
Yeah.
It's not anymore.
That's great. Well, you keep up that enthusiasm and that good cheer, and you can stay sober another day, as will I. This very interview today helped me stay sober. We'll go back into the retreat this afternoon. I've always told people that going to an AA 12-step retreat is like being able to live inside of AA for 36 to 40 hours. Mm-hmm. You get to have your meals with other people, you stay on the same property, you go to meeting after meeting, and by the end of the weekend, you've gotten a whole lot of AA into your life at once. And I see how some of these young guys are really soaking this up, and it's always so gratifying to see it. And I know you've been involved in the administration and the setting up, and so I just really honor you for that kind of commitment as well. It means a lot.
Thank you, Howard.
Well, thanks, Dale. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
You bet. Well, my friends, that's a wrap for yet another captivating interview in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. I want to thank Dale C. for sharing his story, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others about it? And please leave us a rating or review for the show on your podcast app. That'll help others find us. As the number of worldwide listeners grows, this podcast will be of greater help to more and more people. Of course, you can listen to any or all of my other interviews on Apple Podcasts and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to listen to every interview, share your comments, and also to contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.